Good morning, everyone. Today I'll be taking you through Snowflake Intelligence. So let us begin by discussing Snowflake. If you ask me what Snowflake is, I would say Snowflake is a platform that allows you to make your data intelligent. It allows you to understand your data, gain insights into your data and into your business through AI and generative AI. And this is all done in one platform that plays really well with external systems and your internal systems while keeping governance at the core of everything. So by having your data in a secure, safe environment and having AI native functions on that platform, you can truly gain insights and answer critical questions about your data and your business. So why do we often struggle to gain insights from our data? Well, oftentimes data is scattered across many different platforms and apps, and it requires a lot of manual effort to figure out the understanding and the insights within our data. Oftentimes we don't know who to ask, who should have access to what data, as well as what are the requirements. And so all of this, along with finding where the data sits, where the relevant data dashboards are, makes this whole process very time consuming. Snowflake simplifies that process because instead of having scattered data, your data is all in one place. You know, you define the roles up front, so governance becomes less of an issue and it's no longer time consuming. And one of the really cool things about Snowflake that I will discuss later is Snowflake is a platform that is good for technical and non-technical users, and that's very evident in Snowflake Intelligence. So let's talk about Snowflake's generative AI capabilities. So it's called Snowflake Cortex AI. Well, at the most granular and bottom level, we have data ingestion tools on Snowflake. This basically allows you to take your data from any external system that you're currently using, like Workday, Google Drive, Salesforce, and bring your data onto the platform. Once you have access to your data on your platform, you can begin to use Snowflake's inherent built-in functions and capabilities to understand your data. So one of the things that's really cool about Snowflake is really good at handling your typical tabular data that you've seen in Excel, as well as non-tabular data, so images, PDFs, text, all those kinds of documents. So Snowflake can handle both, and you can perform generative AI, natural language query on both kinds of data, and AI functions on both kinds of data. So Snowflake kind of has a three-tier system. We have the scalable AI processing, the state-of-the-art retrieval, and the agentic business insight. So at the most granular level, we have tools that allow us to process uh, document data, understand document data, and we have tools, AI native tools that allow us to understand our structured data. And those can be attached to what we call either Snowflake Cortex Analyst or Snowflake Cortex Search. Cortex Analyst is more so for your structured tabular data, whereas Cortex Search is more so for your unstructured data. And you can attach a Cortex Analyst and a Cortex Search tool or function to your Cortex agent. And your Cortex agent is basically the main way in which you kind of talk to your data on Snowflake. So you have a Cortex agent, and that Cortex agent would sit on your platform like Snowflake Intelligence. So one of the really cool things about Snowflake is it's model agnostic. So whatever your favorite LLM model or provider is, whether it be ChatGPT or Claude, Snowflake, you can gain access to those models on there. As I said, governance is a really core part of Snowflake, and with Snowflake, you have AI native functions that, protect your PII data and make it very difficult for people who shouldn't have access to PII data to have access to data. You can even define things like regional availability, whether someone should be able to see certain kinds of data in specific regions. You can mask your data. If you know how your data works, you can do your typical dynamic data masking. If you don't know how your data works, Snowflake has AI capabilities that allow you to mask your PI data for unstructured, kind of non-known where the PI data situations are. We have evaluation, so you can consistently evaluate the configuration of your Snowflake's intelligence capabilities and agents and analysts. And you can configure it at point A and see how well it performs. And then later you may gain some insight and then you can reconfigure it at point B and test that out to see if it performs better. So you can continuously configure and reevaluate and change whatever capabilities you have on Snowflake and your agents so that you can get a more accurate, deeper understanding of your business. So what is an agent? Basically, the way I like to think of an agent is it's very much how we as people would approach a problem. So we'd be given a problem, we start thinking of to-do lists or plans on how to break down the problem, and we obviously write that down. We keep track of that some way. And we obviously have tools at our disposal, and so we find the right tools to handle each specific task, and we consistently reflect on the output of the tool, our plan, whether we should change our plan, what the result of a tool means, how does this help us derive a accurate response or help us solve a problem. And so Snowflake Intelligence agents work in that specific way as well, and I'll give a bit more detail into that. So how does Snowflake Intelligence work? Well, you often come in with a user prompt, which is, your typical kind of question. Who are my top 10 customers? What is my best performing product? So I will give a demo of this as well, but you'd come in with that question and, you'd pass that question to an agent. An agent will start planning and thinking about how it can answer this kind of question. It will come up with do's and plans, and then it will go to its tools. So it'll go to its Cortex Search, its custom tools, whatever tools it has available. It, asks the tool to do a specific thing and it gets back a response from that tool. And once it has, that response from the tool, it can then reflect on it and eventually generate your response. So let's talk a little bit about what are the kinds of questions you would ask in Snowflake Intelligence to your agents. Well, you maybe ask things like, what are my top selling products and why are people buying them today? And Snowflake Intelligence is really intelligent in the sense that if you ask it an open-ended question like that, it should be able to understand, what you mean or try and figure out what you mean and give you an accurate response. And one of the reasons why it's able to do that is because on Snowflake, you have something called semantic views. So what are semantic views? Semantic views are context. In an agent sense, it's the understanding of your business, the understanding of the relationships between the tables and the databases and data in your business. It's an understanding of how you define certain calculations, what specific things mean for your business. For example, you might say product ID is called PRID in your business. You may define, someone who's of a specific age group as a pensioner, and that may be specific to your business and may not be a general definition. And so you can kind of identify and say all these kinds of things and indicate them in the semantic view. And then what you do is you have your semantic view. It's a tool. You connect your semantic view as a tool to an agent. And so your agent can use it as a tool to understand your data and give you accurate information. Cool. So let's now go to the demo of Snowflake Intelligence. So as I said earlier, Snowflake is really cool because it's a platform for your technical and non-technical users. So you'd have your typical Snow site where your technical users would be, your data engineers, your data analysts, DBAs. They would access Snow site. They'd be interested in the data and changing the data, working with the data. And obviously, your non-technical users may not necessarily need access to that. They may just need to ask questions to your data. So they can go to their own Snowflake Intelligence site, and from there they can ask questions, in a much more simplified, easier to use interface. So let's look at Snowflake Intelligence right now. So this is my Snowflake Intelligence, right? So when you come to Snowflake Intelligence, you see it knows who I am, and let's ask it a simple question, such as, so I've asked it a question, and we can see that Snowflake Intelligence begins to think about our questions. And you can see I've asked it a very open-ended question like who are my best performing customers. I didn't specify what best performing means or how I define performance in my business. And obviously Snowflake Intelligence, the agent underlying, understands this and tries to figure out what that means. And so it says, hey, the semantic model has custom stable with lifetime spend. So it's probably going to use lifetime spend. And that's a fair way of understanding who my best customers are. You see it comes up with its plan. So it's identified here that it needs to query, obviously, the data to find out who my 10 best customers are. And this is a 2-year Cortex Analyst custom analytics. It's going to then provide the answer with the dot. It's going to evaluate if a visualization would add value. And if it does, then it's going to generate a chart of my top 10 performing customers. So you can see it's come with a plan, begins executing its plan. So it's done the first part here. You can see it used the Cortex Analyst to query the top 10 customers. You can see it has that now. And it says, okay, the data looks complete, makes business ready for presentation. So now it says, okay, it's got the results. Now it's got to evaluate a visualization, add value. And it's come to the conclusion that it has. And so it gives me a visualization, an actual bar chart of my 10 best performing customers. Really cool. So it's gone ahead and I can use this bar chart. I can even ask how it was generated. I can download the underlying data and it's somewhat interactive as well. So this is a really simple example of what Snowflake Intelligence can do, but we can ask it, somewhat more of a complicated question. So let's look at this one. So yeah, I asked it, I wanted to understand what products are doing the best in my business. Amongst my customers, again, I didn't specify what are my best performing products. In front, I've obviously defined a little bit of it in the semantic view, but let's see how the Snowflake intelligent agent reasons through that. So it understands, it looks at my semantic model and realizes, it understands that the data appears to be a food and beverage business selling jaffles and beverages. So it understands that. And then it obviously comes up with a plan. So it says this analysis will involve querying overall product performance across multiple metrics, analyzing recent performance to identify current trends, perform validation steps to check data quality, and present top performing performance with appropriate context visualization. Very cool. Now, one of the really cool things about Snowflake Intelligence is it doesn't hallucinate as much because oftentimes it makes use of existing tools and always grounds its response through reflection and calling tools that are already defined. So the likelihood of it hallucinating data is much lower because it's obviously going to grab the data directly from your database through tools. So it's gone ahead and performed one. It's querying the overall performance across multiple metrics, so it does that. But what I really want to draw your attention to is question two, or part of its plan was analyzing recent performance to identify current trends. So we can see that this is part two here. It's gone ahead, but it realizes, hey, it can't do that because the recent data query last 28 days. So obviously, this was an example from Feb 11, 2026, so it knows which day it is. And it realized that this returned nothing because obviously the end of my data is 2025. So obviously it can't gather recent trends. So what does it decide to do? It decides to change its plans. Just like I said, it reflects consistently and it can change its tools and its plan and the response it gives. It's quite smart. So it obviously decides what it needs to do is update its understanding, inform the user about the limitation, and then it goes to part four, which is basically come back here, presenting top performance the appropriate context and visualization. So it realized I can't give him the most recent, so it's going to head and tell me about that and present me with the data anyway. So here we go. We have the top 10 products by revenue, beverages, food, and it does also, it tells me the analysis is based on through August 31. Most recent data is approximately 5 months old. So not only does it potentially understand data, it may even alert you to potential problems in your data. So here's a visualization of the top 10 best performing products. And one of the really cool things about Snowflake Intelligence is you can obviously, it remembers the conversation. So you continue your conversation, ask it questions afterwards. So obviously here I've asked it about my best performing products amongst my customers. I then want to know about my best performing customers. So I can go ahead and ask it about that as well. And it does remember the conversation over time.